I lead EPA's Sustainable Materials Management Program. And you hear a lot of terms out there today: circular economy, resource efficiency, reduce, reuse, recycle, sustainable materials management. And each one has its own little twist to it. I like to say that sustainable materials management encompasses all of those other programs that you hear about that are out there. It certainly encompasses the circular economy, reduce, reuse, recycle, and resource efficiency. Resource efficiency tends to be more of a European term than one that's used in the United States. But sustainable materials management is the program under which we operate. Sustainable materials management is an approach. It's not a destination. But within sustainable materials management, there is a key part of that you see going on right now, and that is really recycling. There's been a lot of talk on the Hill, there's a lot of talk in the news, and I'm sure there's a lot of talk within your organizations about recycling and what's going on in recycling. And a lot of that got to Washington, and when there was a recent termination or cessation or change in how materials were being accepted in some overseas markets, it really created some turmoil within the United States. But out of that turmoil arose a perception that the problems that we were experiencing were because of the changes that were made internationally. I want to beg to dispute that a little bit. I want to beg to dispel a couple of myths. Number one, recycling is not dead. It's alive and well. It's very strong. It's a part of our U.S. economy. EPA did a study back in 2016, and we found that there were close to 800,000 jobs that were generated as a result of recycling efforts. And we also found that recycling really has become an integral part of our lives, that Americans want and expect to recycle. And that too has its positives and negatives. So today, I'm going to focus within the Sustainable Materials Management framework around our United States America Recycles network. All right, how do we implement sustainable materials management at EPA? As you know, solid waste management programs, of which recycling is a part of that, they're implemented at the local level. You are the first step. Those of you who work in local governments, you are the first step. You are the first step in that whole process. And so we at EPA believe that it's the best way for us to provide support for you is providing tools. We also have incentive-based programs. How many of you in here are fans of a football team or a basketball team that's associated with a college? I'm not naming any college. Okay, but within that, there's some competition. And so we have what we call challenges, and those challenges are ways that we get people to kind of compete with each other or compete within themselves in order to reach a goal that they've established for themselves. So we have challenges. We have the Federal Green Challenge, where we challenge other federal agencies to do better. We have the Used Electronics Challenge. We have the Food Recovery Challenge. And we also have a program called WasteWise. Are any of you in here familiar with WasteWise? Okay, so WasteWise is an opportunity for us to provide support for organizations like yours in order to be able to get access to information and tools in order to help you run your organizations more efficiently. I think one of the biggest and strongest areas for EPA is through convening. We have the opportunity to bring folks together from across value chains. And today I'm going to talk about America Recycles value chain, but we bring folks together from across value chains And it's very interesting to see people who've never been in the same room with each other before, to just sit down and have conversations about what challenges they're facing, what opportunities they see, and how the actions of others are impacting them. Because a lot of times people don't know, they don't realize that some of the things that they're doing are impacting them. And I'm saying all this in order to really get into what we're doing within the America Recycles Network. I'm going to give you one example, and I'm not going to name names, but about 6 months ago, we had a little bit of tension on one of our work group phone calls. And afterwards, I was having a conversation with two of those persons who had gotten into an exchange, I'll put it that way. And one of them happened to be a government person, a local government person, and the other one happened to represent one of the brands. And when I say brands, I mean products that you buy that are from different brands. And so the person representing the brand kept saying, look, I've made commitments to my consumers, to my customers, and we need to do this, we need to do this, and so local government, we need you to do this, and we need you to do that. And the local government person kept saying, well, I've made commitments. We have obligations to our constituents. We have obligations that we have to meet for the people that we serve. And therefore, it is necessary for us to do X, 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 and this. And so finally I said, do you realize that you're talking about the same people? That customers and constituents are in fact the same people? And there was a long pause on the phone, because each one had gotten so wrapped up within their own little world and what was impacting them that they were not looking to see outside of that particular box, that they were actually working with the same people and trying to please some of the same people. It's not been smooth sailing, but it's been smoother sailing as a result of that. And I think that's one of the values that EPA brings into the America Recycles efforts, is to really bring people together and help them talk through issues in an environment where people can feel a little safer. We also form partnerships, and I'm hoping to add one more up there called CERTIC before the end of the day, but I haven't put it up there yet because we haven't finished talking to Will yet. But we also form partnerships with others in order to be able to support their efforts and have them support things that will impact from a national basis. All right, so let's talk about successes and opportunities. And again, you've probably heard recycling is dead, and I've talked about the jobs that we created. We also got $6.7 billion in tax revenues from those efforts when we did that study back in 2016. But guess what? We also found that there was $9 billion of materials that were still being thrown away. And that happens on an annual basis. Not everybody in the United States has a robust domestic market like you have here in the Southeast, and we often tout the work that you're doing, and especially a lot of the work that CERTIC is doing, because it allows us to be able to provide concrete data to support those statements that we're making. But you guys are really an example for the rest of the country on how to manage programs effectively. So again, I want to reiterate that import restrictions are not the cause of the challenges that we're facing today, but what they did do was shine a light on them. It really caused us to examine the recycling system to see that we have some challenges there that we need to address. Over the years, we got comfortable in managing our materials in some ways, and we had some countries that were really willing to do on the back end what we were not doing on the front end. And when those processes changed, when those policies changed, then it did reveal some challenges that we had. But what we did find, what you see up here, that there's a lot of confusion about what is recyclable. We have some outdated infrastructure. We do need to work on our domestic markets, and we need to have a variety of management approaches. So I'm going to give you another example about customer confusion. It's interesting being in Washington. because I sit with a lot of policymakers who like to talk, and they also like to solve problems. So I'll go in a meeting and they want to tell me how to solve it within 3 minutes. But they've never been in a MRF, and they've never been at a landfill, and they have no idea what happens when things get picked up from their curb, but they're ready to give me some direction. So I'm going to give you an example. We found that there were a large number of diapers that were ending up in recycling containers. Have any of you experienced that in your programs where diapers are being put in your recycling containers? And so they did this study to find out why these diapers were ending up in the containers. The only problem is they never asked the people who were putting the diapers in the containers why they were putting them in there. And so when we went back and did that, the answer we got back was because it says on the box that it's recyclable. So in a conversation I heard, oh, how ridiculous. Who on earth would think that? Where did they get that from? And so I said, when you take medication, where do you find the directions on how to take that medication? It's often on the packaging. So it's not so unreasonable for people to think that the directions for how to recycle the contents of that package were written on the box. And there was an aha moment for a lot of people there. So we got a lot of calls. EPA, what are you going to do? EPA, what are you going to do? So we work with trade, which is in the Department of Commerce. We work with the State Department. We work with others to just talk about what we needed to do to support efforts to really revitalize our recycling system. And then we started talking with our leadership about bringing people from across the value chain together to have this conversation in front of our leaders. And so last year on November 15th, Administrator Wheeler hosted a summit, and we had, prior to that summit, we met with groups of people to really hear from people across the value chain what kinds of things that were needed. And 4 areas emerged: education and outreach, markets, measurement, and infrastructure. And so those were kind of the topics, the buckets in which we arranged the dialogue that we had at the summit. And we had representatives, as I said, across the value chain to just come and sit with these senior leaders to dialogue with them and let them know some of the challenges that they were facing, but also the goals that they had for their programs, and to talk with the leadership about how the federal government could support the recycling system in this country. They also signed a pledge. We had 45 people sign the pledge, 45 organizations, I should say, signed the pledge. And many of you in this room have signed the pledge. And that pledge really just is a commitment to working together, to working collaboratively. We now have over 100, I think at last count it was 140 organizations that have signed the pledge. And I think that's great because it really shows that people are interested. Those people will now a part of our recycling network, and they will be engaged in those dialogues as we move forward with the work that we have. So as I said, these are the areas that emerged from there, and the work groups have been active over the last year. Chantel Fryer is a part of one of the work groups. She's with your Department of Commerce. Will is a leader. I think he's supposed to be on one work group, but we keep dragging him into 2, and now I talked to him over last week, and we're going to put him on a 3rd one. So I just got to figure out how to get him on the 4th one, but we'll have him on all of them before it's all over. But these work groups have been working together over the last year to really identify some actions that can be taken, because one of the directives that we got from Administrator Wheeler after the summit was, I don't want you coming back here next year telling me that you just talked about this over the next year. I want you to really have some actions that we can move forward on and some things that we can put into place. So the education and outreach work group is working together to develop some clear and consistent messages about proper materials management activities. And we really want our consumers to see the value of either reusing, recovering, or recycling their materials, as well as buying materials or products with recycled content. they put a priority on developing consistent messaging. And we're really hoping that the brands, that you as local governments, that other organizations who support the recycling system, that we'll all start saying the same thing. And I've seen that in the meeting that I attended on yesterday, where you guys have gotten what is it, recycle right, recycle often, recycle right is what South Carolina is doing in order to have that consistent messaging. For enhancing our infrastructure, we really want to create a holistic, modern, and adaptable national recycling infrastructure that will embrace innovation and will be resilient to change. As you all know, when we first started building MRFs, they were built to accommodate a select group of materials. And we've got new materials that have come into play now, and the MRFs aren't really able to, the traditional MRFs aren't really able to accommodate those materials. So we're hoping that we will build a resilient system that is adaptable, that is able to adjust to changes, and really, now we're talking about plastics. Every day I read something about plastics, plastics, plastics. And plastics are a challenge, but plastics in themselves are not bad. It's how we manage them. Plastics are the topic for right now. 5 years from now, I predict it will be another material that will also be a challenge. So we want to build infrastructure that's capable of really being adaptable and resilient to change. Secondary markets, and infrastructure is something that we are working, I'm going to go back to infrastructure. So infrastructure is something that we're really hoping to partner with CERTIC with in order to identify what we have in this country and what is needed. Where are those pulse points that we really need to concentrate some of our energy, some funding? We've been talking about Congress, talking to Congress about some funding, and within EPA on how we can redirect some funding in order to really support infrastructure and markets, but really trying to get that material processed in a way that it can be ready to go to our markets. So we want to strengthen our secondary markets. We've hosted, along with the National Recycling Coalition, several workshops, several states. We've used the Department of Commerce and how it works with industry here in South Carolina as an example of some things that states can do, but really talking about how we can strengthen our secondary markets in order to make them more viable and also be able to accommodate market changes. And I keep calling on saying Will's name, but that's because he really has brought some practical suggestions as to what we need to do, and also to highlight. I think last week he spoke at the Sustainable Packaging Coalition meeting, and our senior leader that was there from EPA really heard that statement about local governments really not being able to adjust when there are rapid changes or when there are fluctuations, that you have budgets that you have to stick to, that you have to go through processes in order to acquire new equipment. And so really having that conversation and hearing that dialogue as a part of that panel helped educate our senior leadership on some of the things that we need to do in order to better support you. And then enhancing measurements, being able to talk about what we have and where it is. And so we really want to focus over the next year on having a definition of recycling. If you were to go to the EPA website, there are actually 4 definitions of recycling on there. They were created by different offices, and none of them talked to each other while they were in the process of developing them. So we're trying to get some consistent definitions, not only within EPA, but throughout the federal government. So the other question I get is, what is EPA going to do? You've asked us to do these things, EPA, what are you going to do? So we are going to continue to facilitate our work groups. We are really trying to get a national campaign. How many of you have difficulties with film in your MRFs? And film is a problem with trying to get recycling that's in a state for you to be able to really process it more efficiently. So we really want to do a national campaign focused around film. We want to continue holding those workshops. People have said that they're very useful. And we're also updating the Recon tool to be able to calculate emissions reductions. In addition, we are working on a federal register notice to see if we need to look at making some changes in our comprehensive procurement guidelines. Those are the guidelines that the federal government has to use in order to procure in their procurement process. And so we set the standards for them to be able to use that. We're also updating our recycling, a guide for state and local governments, and we're also going to be releasing a framework which will capture everything that I'm kind of sharing with you today, but in more detail to let you know more about what we're doing. No good deed goes unpunished. Last week we had a very successful America Recycles Day, so the administrator said this year I want a week. So we're having a week. When I worked at DHEC, Bob King, who was the former environmental commissioner there, used to tell me that no deed is too difficult if you're not the one that has to do it. So I got charged with developing a week, and so you see up here a list of the week's activities, which will be culminating on Friday, where we will have another summit, and I invite many of those of you who have not had the opportunity to really sign the pledge and attend the summit. On Thursday, we will be hosting an innovation fair where we've invited those who have products, who have approaches, who have activities, who have equipment, to really come and demonstrate that, but it needs to be something that can be scaled up and used on a national basis. So I encourage you to come in a day early before the summit and also attend the fair, because I think we will have a lot of exciting exhibits for people to see. So with that, I want to say thank you. Thank you for having me here today. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to come to these beautiful gardens and to spend the day with you. And I look forward to seeing all of you in Washington, D.C. the week of November 11th. Thank you.